All right, why don't we get rolling? Welcome again. My name is David Yoakum. I'm the director of the Policy Lab at Brown University. It's great to see you here today. For those that are old colleagues and friends, for those that are new, welcome to the Policy Lab. I hope after the event you go check us out at thepolicylab.brown.edu. You'll learn that we're a community of practice of applied researchers and practitioners who are working every day asking questions about how methods and insights from the scientific fields can be used to improve public policy and program operations. I'm very excited for the conversation today. My role, aside from just wanting a chance to welcome everyone, is to actually pass the baton over to my good friend and colleague, James Diossa, who's a senior advisor at the Policy Lab, as well as a former mayor of Central Falls, Rhode Island. James is going to do the intro from here. You'll see me again on the back end when I'll help out with some of the Q&A. But welcome again, everyone, and welcome, mayors. James, the mic is yours.
Thank you, David, so much. And it's exciting to be here with my good friend, Mayor Steve Benjamin. This is a first of a series where I'll have the opportunity to interview and talk to mayors from across the country. And truly, it's an honor to have as the first Mayor Steve Benjamin of Columbia, South Carolina, who's been the 36th mayor of Columbia. He assumed office July 1st, 2010, has been in office for 11 years, was the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors from 2018, 2019, a Democrat, married, has two daughters, and sadly, he's retiring from office this year. Mayor, so good to have you. Thank you for being on today. It's a true pleasure.
It's great. It's great to be with you, James. Miss seeing you, brother.
Likewise. So we'll jump right in. Mayor, can you give us a little background about yourself and your career journey?
Absolutely. No, as James mentioned, I've been mayor of Columbia. July 1st will be 11 years. I'm a Queens, New York native. My parents were in that last wave of Southern immigrants or refugees, maybe, as Reverend Jesse Jackson calls them, who left the South, left Orangeburg, South Carolina back in the 60s. And my brother and I, born and raised in Queens, and came back here to college, matriculated at the University of South Carolina, where I got very involved at the time in student politics, on taking the Confederate battle flag off the dome where it flew in a sovereign position, and protesting over apartheid in South Africa, and trying to get U.S. companies and pension funds to divest from those who did business in South Africa, and stayed involved through college and law school, very active in all types of issues around education and civil rights, and also downtown business development, and developed a real love and a connection to the city of Columbia. I had an opportunity not long, about 5-6 years after finishing law school, to join our former governor's cabinet. Served as a director of a state agency for a few years, and got my first taste of real politics, and ran for office. First run I ran for attorney general at age 32. Was a pretty sharp guy, but I probably had no business being anyone's attorney general anyway. I lost that race, but stayed actively involved in improving the community, and decided a few years later that my future was actually in trying to really shape the city that was my new home, and make it better for future generations. So I considered running in 2006, and decided not to, but signed right back up in 2010.
And so what inspired you to get into politics?
Well, you all know it's amazing. Getting into politics, I got here young, bright-eyed kid, 17 years old, from Queens. Columbia, when I got here, my first day in school was my very first day ever visiting Columbia. There's more than enough, believe me, more than enough to say grace over, to motivate a young man or any young leader in training with an activist mindset to want to get involved. What led me to this particular opportunity, I will tell you, was when DeAndre and I had our first daughter. It's amazing how the community in which you live, the proximity and the responsibility of having children fundamentally changes your mindset. In our situation, Columbia was a fantastic capital city, amazing amounts of potential, but we'd spent generations, literally. The story of the American South, but more profound in South Carolina, generations losing our most talented citizens to cities all across the country, and here in the Southeast to Atlanta and Charlotte and Washington, D.C. And I decided that I wanted to play a central role in creating the city that then our one daughter, Bethany, would eventually, when she had the opportunity to choose where she would live, to have the opportunity to choose Columbia. And that was going to take the active leadership of her mom and dad in making that happen. So I said, what better way to do that than to run for mayor? And we had a good mayor. My predecessor, he actually served as mayor for 20 years. He chose to run again in 2006. So I supported his campaign, and then decided in 2010 that I would jump in. And it was about Bethany, and we had another daughter, our youngest, Jordan Grace, both amazingly talented, gifted, bright young ladies now, no longer little girls, as they remind me. I realized my mission had to be more than about them. The reality is that but they have both sets of grandparents here in Columbia now. The Benjamin girls are always going to be fine. They're going to be taken care of. But the goal was, how do you create a city that allows every child the opportunity to live up to their God-given potential, to do the amazing things that we know that they can do if they indeed have the luxury and opportunity to be children, to be able to be nurtured and fed and sheltered and kept safe, and allow them to blossom into what we know they can do. So it became my mission to try and create the most talented, educated, entrepreneurial, equitable city that we possibly could. And it's been my mission for the last 11 years.
So you get elected as mayor. Can you describe what your first year was like as mayor?
Well, it's kind of like for those of us who may have a long-term, pastor, or rabbi, imam, or what have you. When you have that long-term mayor who's been mayor for 20 years, and you got to follow him. And I would say decidedly popular mayor and a genuinely good man. It's a transition that I embraced, because our campaign was really about pushing the boundaries, about living well outside the expectations of what our potential actually was. We ran on the theme of One Columbia, which a lot of folks use that theme now. But when we did it, it was immediately after, of course, President Obama's election. And I was really concerned about some of the political divisions we saw ramping up here in South Carolina in the wake of that. So I very intentionally hired Democratic consultants and Republican consultants, although it's a nonpartisan race. I hired the guy who ran field for the Obama campaign in the state, then I went and hired the guys who ran the McCain campaign as well, just showing people that the vast majority of issues that you should be focused on leading the city really have no partisan bearings. And if you constantly speak to the things that unify us in edifying terms, you can force people to work together in a way that's truly collaborative and thoughtful, and again, focused on posterity, not just your city here and now. So we push some boundaries. Our way our council is structured, there are only 7 members of council. The mayor is a voting member of council. So I made a promise during the campaign that the easy things would be easy to do. The tougher things would, by definition, be a lot tougher. We would have some 4-3 votes on some major issues as we push the city to be more transparent, push the city to make more investments in infrastructure, push the city to think more broadly about the way in which we work. We were way ahead of the curve on trying to reform law enforcement and policing and some of the things that we really needed to do. We had to redevelop parts of our city that had been neglected for years, including pulling into the public domain the largest redevelopment project in probably any downtown east of the Mississippi, a 181-acre campus. Was formerly our state mental health institution. All these things are going to be tough, and we didn't slow down. We put our foot to the pedal to the metal, I guess, and this went straight at some of them. and we were able to win some. We lost some, but we learned a lot of lessons along the way about the ways in which you spend time, consensus building. You pull people together. You work in smart, intergovernmental, intersectoral ways. But once you have a chance to find that cohesion, that collective vision, then you have to lead and actually work to get it done, which is sometimes more difficult even than the collaboration.
And so in that first year, was there anything in specific that surprised you or you didn't expect?
Oh, wow. Oh, a whole any number of things. I have to go back and work my way through it. But I think we started off on the right foot in that we pulled together a transition team, and obviously some of the stuff is easy, especially if you succeed a 20-year mayor. And we pulled together 300 citizens across 8 different areas. From environmental and sustainability to policing and safe communities, to even walkability and bikeability and economic development, all these different areas, and really use that as an opportunity to just source as many ideas as possible. Historic preservation, we hadn't told the story of, usually when you tell the story of the South, particularly Columbia, First Baptist Church, just 3 blocks from City Hall is where the original secession convention was held. And as a result, in 1865, when General Sherman visited Columbia, he burned down the whole city. But usually when you talk about history and historic preservation, people only tell that story of the South, or only that story of South Carolina, only that story of Columbia. So it's important. It was important for me to try to, as best we could, spend that first year beginning to rewrite that narrative, to tell the story of the African seed and American son, to tell the story of our Jewish citizens, including the Jewish mayors we had in the 1800s who helped build Columbia, to tell the story of Irish indentured servants who built the canals that connected shipping between Columbia and Charleston, who were required to build these canals because at that time their lives as indentured servants were less valuable than enslaved human beings treated as chattel slavery. But being able to tell those stories of pain and suffering in the way that pulled people together. So we spent a great deal of time the first year really developing and redeveloping our personal narrative into one that was truly reflective of the strengths of who we were.
Thank you. And we're here at the Policy Lab. We're always looking at policy, and we're interested in if you could give us a picture of how policymaking typically works in the mayor's office.
Sure. At times, and you know this, James, from our interaction at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, it's amazing where a good idea can come from. I mean, it can come from a 77-year-old, a 7-year-old, someone who engages with the policymaker either in an organized way or by chance. A great deal of our ideas, quite frankly, would come from you and I sitting down in Pittsburgh. We were in Pittsburgh having lunch, in Pittsburgh for lunch, or at a conference of mayors meeting, and you're sharing the very best practices you have on any number of issues with your colleagues. So oftentimes, policy ideas will come from mayors, but the very best ideas tend to come from the fact that you have so many subject matter experts in your community, and particularly those that might have universities. I mean, obviously, there are very few cities in the country that have the resources of a Brown University. But if you have a university or a research institution within the confines of your community, tapping into those subject matter experts and asking them for guidance and resources and capacity building to help address these challenges, treating almost treating the city almost as using as a textbook, as a lab, as an opportunity to do some things. So we've gotten the best ideas from everywhere, including some of my colleagues on council as well, and we have some very talented staff. There's no magic way for it to necessarily get to the city council, to the agenda, to take that idea into policy or law, or maybe sometimes it's just a statement of our principles where we happen to be. But what I've often encouraged folks to do, people in the public sector, private sector, nonprofit, or philanthropic sector, is to really, if you want to make something happen, dial in to the issues that are most important to your to those policymakers, and try to find some connectivity that you can approach someone exactly where they are, where their priorities are, and then it helps you navigate the sometimes circuitous path to policymaking. And I usually say it like this. So oftentimes people walk into our doors at City Hall, into the mayor's conference room, and they'll tell me how they're going to solve my problems. But they've never asked me what my problem is. They've never asked me what keeps me up at night. What's the challenge, Madam Mayor, that you find most pressing, and then try to find a way to help solve that problem. It's amazing how those ideas can then take on a life of their own, and start providing some just multiple solutions to different challenges.
So, Mayor, can you just walk us through when you want to enact a new policy? What are the steps that you take to make it a reality?
Sure. Well, when I want to enact a new policy, depending, obviously there's some, and I should probably say all ideas should be advanced in a very collaborative way, and you want to give something the time it deserves to marinate and share and sit out there and allow for all types of public comment. But there are some that quite frankly, that bring with them a sense of gravity and urgency that it requires that you move fast. Those items that we tend to believe, I believe, are definitional as to who we are as a community. Those that relate to racism and anti-Semitism and bigotry and hate. We've been quick to articulate policy on issues as relates to not just the right to bear arms, but the responsibilities accorded to those who bear those arms. We've led immediately after the Las Vegas shooting, when most of us had never heard of a bump stock or a trigger crank. We became the first city in the country within weeks to ban trigger cranks and bump stocks in our cities. And we've continue to lead on red flag laws and gun-free school zones and banning ghost guns. When it comes to those policies, we really sometimes it's never done by fiat. I don't have that authority, but it moves with that very same sense of urgency. It goes from idea to well-drafted policy through our legal office and onto our agenda for aggressive public debate and passage. More often than not, other issues tend to be more complex. If you've identified an issue around infrastructure, around water and sewer infrastructure, sometimes to some people it's just that broken pipe in the middle of the road that's creating a pothole that you're frustrated that your car axle is getting hit on. But in reality, there are issues that go to how you finance repairing the infrastructure, what this means in terms of water quality in certain parts of town that may have been disinvested over a period of time, what this means in terms of environmental justice and how you might start having sanitary sewer overflows into your rivers and tributaries that feed not only wildlife, but the people in your community. So when we have those types of issues that are so much more interconnected and interdependent, we facilitate a much larger dialogue that includes all of our council, that includes all of our staff, that if indeed we need community leaders involved in that discussion as well, and then certainly the 6 policymakers, and it works its way through the process. And I apologize for my killer dog, 2 pounds in the background, are making all types of noise in the background.
Oh, it's all good. This is the era of Zoom.
This is era of Zoom. She's
Right.
surprised she's not in here on my lap.
So, you know, when you first became mayor, was there one policy that you were determined to tackle? And out of that, what did it teach you about future endeavors?
Yeah, you know, we had a challenge when I became mayor. I mean, it's not something that most people ever want to talk about because it's not fun or sexy or whatever the term is now. With fiscal stewardship, we had a few years where healthcare costs were through the roof, and it threw our city budget out of whack. This is before I became mayor, and the city went 2 years without being able to close its books. So I ran as a central theme of our campaign was around fiscal stewardship. And so while we couldn't close books, our predecessor council still would raise taxes. We were not investing in our infrastructure, and as a result, or under consent decree to invest in our wastewater infrastructure. And so I ran under the idea and the theme that we were going to get the city's finances in order. We were shutting down fire stations. We were not investing in 21st century policing. And I determined that if we could prove to people, oftentimes when we talk about fiscal stewardship or taxing and spending, people think that those are Republican talking points. I'm not a Republican, and I don't do Republican talking points. But when you talk about fiscal stewardship, believe me, that independent, that Democrat, that Republican, that wealthy guy, and that single mom or single dad who's sitting there at the kitchen table trying to figure out how to make ends meet, they really care that you're being a good steward of their limited financial resources. You've got to be able to, as a city, show that type of fiscal discipline in order to engender the type of trust that then allows you to go out and do some of the more progressive things that you want to do. So we promised that we would get arms around the city's finances. I thought last year, because last year, 2020 was a dog year, but 8 of the last 10 years, we finished with a budget surplus in the city. We've never raised taxes. We've invested almost $750 million in water, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure, including green stormwater infrastructure, the first standalone stormwater green bond in the country, certified green by the Climate Bond Initiative. Our first year, I decided not to take a salary. I gave it to employees to incentivize creative ideas that if they could show how they were saving the city money, we would bonus them out of what was supposed to be my salary. We focused on a very intentional economic development strategy that focused on central city growth, urban growth, vertical growth that creates more tax base, surrounded by good suburbs. And in places like Columbia, you can be in the rural fishing for boar, hunting for fishing for bass, or hunting for boar, 30 minutes outside of town. But we decided we were going to really focus on fiscal stewardship. And if we were able to show that type of discipline, then my ideas around second chance policies, giving men and women who've been out of the American economic mainstream for offenses committed before they finish puberty, giving them a second chance and pulling them back into American society, or some of the investments we wanted to make in whether it be urban farming or food and security. And sometimes in an environment, my city is well, I'd say we're decidedly blue. We have a significant number of Republicans here. We're a majority white community. We're not an African American community. So that there was some dialogue that would need to be had, but you had to show first that you're respecting people's hard-earned dollars. So a lot of our time that first year was about articulating our economic strategy, our financial strategy, in order to build the ties that bind and give you the credibility to then push on some of the other ideas that you have.
And obviously, your time at the U.S. Conference of Mayors was a very special time for me. I got to meet you there and become friends. And you led a group of your colleagues across the country as the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. What was the most interesting thing you learned or realized in your time as president?
Well, you learn that while your city is special, Central Falls, Columbia, Miami, Houston, we're all special and unique, that our ideas, our ideals, our challenges, hopes, and dreams are all the same, scalable, and as a result, you're able to learn so much from your peers. My grandma would say that God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You're supposed to listen twice as much as you talk. So I learned the power of listening, and as a result, I got to learn so much and just to import so many ideas back to Columbia. My staff would hate when I come back from a meeting because I come back with all types of ideas for them to start. They're like, okay, he's back now. But it was time to hit the ground running. But the power, just some time we spent together, the power of the water cooler conversation, or just sitting down and having a glass of milk, what have you, you start a dialogue, and you're just like, okay, I want to try that. Would you send me that? We started the Small Cities Forum. You were our first co-chair of the Small Cities Forum, and it was a heck of an opportunity. And I actually think it was your idea. It was a heck of an opportunity. That first meeting, gosh, we had scores of mayors who showed up in a place that usually the dialogue has been dominated by the Chicagos and the New Yorks and the LAs, and you wind up with this robust group of amazingly accomplished public officials, many of whom also had success in the nonprofit or business world as well. And we're just sharing ideas and learning, how to do not just our jobs as mayor better, but also being able to show the power of bipartisan and nonpartisan leadership in a time in which politics can be so tribal and divisive. To be able to walk into a room and see 2 mayors, if she's a Republican or he's a Democrat or vice versa, and that was powerful. And I always came back from our meetings energized and ready to take on the next several months ahead of me.
So are there universal policy challenges, or are they often regional?
Every part of the country, I think, has its own DNA, and even sometimes in the states in which you live, challenges can be different, because sometimes I stay in almost a constant state of battle with our state government at times. I'm currently being sued by our attorney general on several laws we passed to try and promote. I ran a law enforcement agency. I am a gun owner. I also believe in the Second Amendment, but I also believe that with rights come responsibilities. And we disagree, so he sues me, and that is what it is. So every part of the country is different. The challenge is, I believe, that in cities, however, cities tend to be much more representative of communities of interest than state governments tend to be. You look at a map even of our country, and some of these states are perfectly drawn boxes by cartographers that don't necessarily represent communities of interest. You know, city, you can take a glass of milk and throw it on the floor, and you'll find that common thread, that former Native American trade route developed by the Aborigines of this country, that communities begin to sprout around, or those rivers, the three rivers that serve as the birthplace of this city 200 plus years ago. We become natural communities of interest. I believe living, breathing organisms. So our politics in cities, regardless of where you are, tend to be a whole lot more similar, even regardless of size, than the politics of the states that we operate in. And that has obviously, particularly in some of our states, become an amazing challenge as you look at preemption laws, from everything from firearms to how you roll out broadband, to any number of issues, environmental policies, and we're obviously an important point. The decennial census, yields the opportunity to go through reapportionment and redistricting right now in every state. So I think a lot of us are dialing in on the opportunity to maybe use this every 10-year opportunity to maybe have districts that more so reflect, again, communities of interest, and then yield people who become a bit more, not to be more progressive, they need to be more pragmatic, really just focus on solving the problems facing the community.
The biggest question I'm sure every mayor is being asked is, what have you learned from this pandemic?
Oh, Lord mercy. What have we not learned? This has been, the pandemic, the greatest pandemic since 1918, the greatest economic disruption, certainly in election year, maybe since 1932, and the greatest social unrest since 1968 because of systemic racism and police violence, all wrapped up into 2020 under Donald Trump as president. I mean, what a year it was. And so many of our friends and colleagues, you know it well, physically, emotionally, mentally exhausted, drained. What I learned from 2020, I mean, I think it's probably a number of different things. I learned the power. Again, my parents have always been very clear with me, learn the power of humility, that you don't know everything. I mean, when you're faced with the pandemic and with a virus that still kills thousands daily, you just don't know, but you have to make decisions that are life-threatening decisions. Sometimes with very little information, we learn to be driven by our what I believe in almost everything we do should be our one true north. Our one true north should be the preservation of human life, and then of course livelihoods, but preservation of human life. And it was an opportunity to show us almost like an X-ray of American society, global society. A lot focused on the U.S. of an X-ray that showed so many broken bones across our society. The challenging systemic issues that were facing us, so the power of humility that tells you that you don't have all the answers. That there's power in building good, strong intergovernmental ties. There's power in building intersectoral relationships. There's power in using the bully pulpit to speak to the value of science and data, and then not leave it there, but to take that science and data and begin to humanize it in a way that again pulls people together at a time when everyone's scrambling, running in different directions. It taught me, it has taught me, continues to teach me the power of humility, and then obviously you want against the backdrop of again, not just COVID-19, but with the social justice movement and the economic challenges and how even now we watch this K-shaped recovery with those of us who do well doing better and those who are already being challenged by automation and AI and advanced machine learning changing the future of work and watching this growing gap between the haves and the have-nots, to watch that division accelerate. We brought 2031 to 2021 very quickly. It teaches you that that sometimes you will not have the luxury of having all the information. You will not have the luxury of having every bit of data. So you've got to be grounded in a maybe a true servant spirit to make the very best decisions you can for the right reasons, and sometimes as quickly as you can. And that teaches you again the power of partnerships. Partnerships are born usually of the fact that we know we don't know everything. And so it goes back again to the spirit of humility. It's taught me to become, again, a lifelong learner. I'm learning something every single day and trying to put it into action to help the people that I serve.
My last question before I pass it back to Executive Director David Yoakum for Q&A. I mentioned early on that this is your last year in office. Love to know what's next.
Oh man, we'll see. I will say a great silver lining, and I've heard this from so many friends of the pandemic. Mayors, we're glass half full kind of people. Always looking for the moral of the story. The great silver lining of the pandemic has been a whole lot more time with DeAndre and our girls. I actually like my wife. A lot of men I like the house. My wife's pretty cool, and we adore our girls. And we've had more time around the dinner table, walking the neighborhood, just quality time. And I will tell you, it planted a great seed of me wanting the little girl that made me decide to run for mayor in 2 years. We'll be off to college. Our sister will be off 2 years behind her. I wanted to spend a whole lot more time with them. I'm a lawyer by training, so I'll be practicing law and doing a number of the things in business that I'm excited about, but also deeply involved. I was as involved in this community before I was mayor as I have been as mayor on a number of nonprofit boards. I'm going to be intimately involved in this redistricting and reapportionment process, as well as obviously voter engagement, voter education, as we continue to work to make South Carolina live up to her full potential. Our state's motto is "Doom Spiro Spero, while I breathe I hope," and it's our job to continue to push South Carolina into to live to its full potential.
Thank you so much, Mayor Benjamin. It's been a true pleasure having this conversation with you. I wish you all the best. And again, thank you for your friendship, your inspiration. And I'll pass it back on to David, who will do the Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Thank you so much, James.
Always.
Thank you, Mayors Benjamin and Diossa. That's great. So we are to the Q&A portion. There's a couple that have already come in, which I'll come to now. But let me encourage you, if you haven't asked a question yet, please feel welcome to raise your hand. I can actually call on you, and you can just use your own voice rather than having to go through me. But if you prefer to put it in the chat or the Q&A function, you're welcome to do that too. And I'll start with a question from Kenneth, which was generated when y'all were talking about sustainable economic development, really kind of trying to avoid a race to the bottom approach with financial incentives. He was curious to hear more about what your guiding principles were on how you really do that.
Sure. It's not easy. And the process of innovation is only strengthened by the process of iteration. We tried ideas, I will tell you, that were incredibly progressive early on, that fell flat because we probably hadn't spent the time nurturing it as much as we we should have. Early on, I came across some grant dollars. A nonprofit company was folding. They had about $300,000 that they had to dispense of, and asked me how we could use it. They wanted to direct it in one way. I wanted to try something different, which I would spend a great deal of time on one side of town. They would tell me they couldn't find jobs. And citizens just couldn't find jobs. A number of them had run-ins with the law in the past. Then I go to the other side of town, and in the business community, the chamber crowd would say, we can't find employees. And I'm like, okay, there's something off here. How about if we try to connect these worlds using our technical college system, which is our community college system here. Amazing. It's why South Carolina has done such a great job attracting advanced manufacturing from all across the globe, Boeing, BMW, and the like, in which we would actually connect those who were jobless with opportunities to get their certificates and training in our technical college system, and then negotiate with the businesses that they would indeed get employees who were not perfect citizens and had perfect lives, just like the rest of us. None of us have led perfect lives, but that we would channel people into these jobs. We paid tuition, we paid transportation, we paid childcare, we did it all, and we still had a significant failure rate, primarily because of drug use, and a number of our citizens just couldn't make their way through the program. Even once they made it through the program, some would start a job and fail because of some type of drug use. What that taught us was that if we're actually going to be involved in the business of trying to connect those dots, that we had to dig a bit deeper into the challenges of intersectionality, into the challenges of getting into the neighborhoods and understanding what was happening there. It's led me towards the idea more so of, if you think about sustainable economic development practices. And I do not toss out, I want to be very clear, the idea of providing incentives for economic development. I believe that well-placed, well-designed incentives for a specific purpose can actually help you do what you want to do. Can help. Believe me, 100% of nothing is zero. Okay, if you're able to incentivize the type of development that you want, it's thoughtful, that may be green, that helps meet some public purpose. Public action has to meet public benefit, but we've been able to incentivize, for example, private sector student housing in the city of Columbia that, but for the incentives, would never have been built. But because of the incentives, we'll send over the next decade well over $100 million to our public schools here in Columbia. It's important to have. But the point I was going to make is I'm a huge believer in our policies at the city being designed to push your partners and push your vendors to live within the values of the city. We are a second chance city. I'm a Christian. I don't know how I could be serve a God of second chances and not be a mayor of second chances. So we pushed through a policy at our city in which we gave those who've run afoul of the law in the past second chances. And now, as a result of that, we have hundreds of employees who have criminal records who are all performing admirably. The next step is to make sure that those who do business with us also reflect those practices. We put into our contracts requirements for minority and women and small businesses to be partners in almost every single deal, every single infrastructure deal. We spend a lot of money, as I mentioned, close to $750 million on infrastructure into our projects. So when we build things, we built a baseball stadium years ago. We put in some very clear rules that not only had minority-owned and African-American-owned businesses helping build the place, but also to finance the place. But also we went and found 40 men and one woman with our homeless shelter and our housing authority, and trained them to become construction workers. And several of them are still, 6 years later, still working construction projects around town. They needed a leg up and they needed an opportunity. So the question is, how do you create economic opportunity? I would not, I know it was maybe central to part of that question, I would not dismiss economic incentives outright as a tool to building equitable communities. The question is, what do you layer it with, and how do you layer it and structure in a way that you make sure it reaches deep into the community? And some of these same tools that you use, it takes a little more creativity as you build your capital stack, but some of the same tools you use to build an office building or build a student housing complex can also be used to build affordable housing complex or workforce housing efforts. We've been able to use some pretty creative tools to use our community development block grant dollars and partnerships with private sector banks. Banks are not always very popular, but we use our CDBG dollars as a 20% down payment on a mortgage for people who are 80% or below of our area median income. The bank comes in and provides the other 80% of the mortgage. But since we're providing our money in what is basically a low interest or no interest loan, 1% is what is at its highest, a revolving amount that goes back into as people pay it. People are able to get into homes with $500 out of pocket, a very low interest loan, no PMI on the mortgage. And as a result, we now have a loan portfolio of $130 million that with a very low a default rate, less than 1% of people who are at 80% of the area median income. We decided 4 years ago, that we were going to modify the program. It was so successful to actually start giving residency bonuses to our police officers to encourage them to also live in the city. That bonus serves as their down payment on a home. So officers are now living in the communities that they're charged with keeping safe. So there's so many different ways to look at almost everything you do in terms of economic development to try and help you build your goal of building truly equitable and sustainable communities. There's no simple cookie cutter way.
Here's a question from Lauren that begins with the observation that even the best of policies can go sideways during implementation. And so what's your advice for leaders and their staff that I'm sure they've got their own priorities and things they're excited about, but they're also responsible for past projects that have put in place that need sort of tending on the implementing. How do you think about getting that balance right?
It can be a challenge, and sometimes if you have a bunch of type A's or just go getters in your office, everybody's going and trying to do everything at once. And the reality is that doesn't always work out too well. You have to have a very clear strategy and goals. If you have a plan, your goals are measurable. Obviously, they have to be achievable. It has to be results oriented, where we're trying to get to, and the responsibility has to be clear as to who has responsibilities towards getting something done. That's just sacrosanct as if you're actually going to be able to execute on a plan. It doesn't mean everything's going to go well, but it does mean that you have to sometimes slow down, stop, put nice systems in place to help you manage what you're doing, and let you close out projects before you start new ones. I mean, and it may sound really simple, but I would encourage people to use different project management software that actually helps you keep track of what you're doing and how you're doing it. Maybe like a Asana or what have you. But it helps, particularly people. I mean, right now, and I will tell you that a lot of folks are pulling their hair out as we think about maybe the state at times of American democracy. I actually find myself quite encouraged when I see the level of passion and activism in our communities right now. People want better, and if we can find ways to bottle up that passion and figure out how you turn all this pain and passion into real progress, how do you really move things forward? I feel incredibly confident about the future of the republic, but it is going to require some type of a systems management that allows you actually to get things done.
Here's a question from Zai that begins with the observation that unfunded pension liabilities have a big impact on municipal budgets, and they're going to continue to grow likely. without some sort of serious intervention. So what are your thoughts on tools like asset transfers and other innovative ways to better fund pensions?
Did someone plant that question, or is that like a real question?
It's you
Oh,
can see it in the Q&A.
only at Brown University. Okay, pause on that. Okay, that's pretty cool. I am I'm a public finance lawyer by training. And so when I talk about getting our arms around the fiscal challenges of our cities, our pension liabilities, unfunded pension liabilities are significant all across this country. Our non-pension related liabilities, our OPEBs, our medical and dental benefits are just as significant. I might add. I am a believer in smart public-private partnerships. I do believe that public-private partnerships, again, that are public-private partnerships that inure to the public action, should yield public benefit, are creative ways, and I represent some people in my private practice in this space. I want to be very clear. Are ways, and not always the answer, but they are very creative ways in which you can leverage the significant public assets that are in literally sitting right before you, and recycle those assets in a way that helps either meet pension liabilities or also meet some of the great and significant infrastructure or human infrastructure needs in a community. But the challenges around pension liabilities are real. The public sector did not shift, and obviously there are enough arguments on either side of the argument. 30, 40 years ago, as plans were shifting from defined contribution, defined benefit plans, to defined benefit to defined contribution plans, that would allow our way of funding of these long-term obligations in a meaningful way. And as a result, the vast majority, significant, a supermajority of our pension systems are woefully underfunded. And those that we spent a great deal of time early on in my administration. We're in the state pension system, so we're not as plagued with that challenge. But we do have our OPEB challenge. When I came in office, it was our other post-employment benefit obligation was well over $200 million, and we had to make some very difficult decisions, including we still have not yet made a decision to put the cash that we have set aside in trust, which would allow us to reduce our long-term actuarial liability on those funds. But we've been able to manage them very well, much better than most places. We're not fully funded, but we're in pretty good shape. It's a major challenge that obviously the money we see coming in under the American Rescue Plan and other funds cannot be used to address those liabilities. So the problem will still persist, and if there are opportunities, as the question suggested, to look at asset recycling or other tools to try and address that liability, it should be aggressively pursued. It's a way in which you're not just managing for the day by freeing up legitimate assets you can use every single day, but you're also making good decisions for posterity.
So we're fast running out of time. I'm gonna see if I can squeeze in two more quick questions. One, you're totally right. At the Policy Lab, we've got a lot of scientists that are interested in contributing their skills or learnings to policymakers. I'm curious your thought on, I'm sure you interact with lots of scientists and technical advisors. What's something that they do that, if you had others, they would not do, that gets a scientific person who's trying to advise, they get off on the wrong foot, they're doing things to decrease the likelihood they're listened to? What are the things they should avoid?
I don't dislike. I can't think of anything that scientists do that I dislike. But I do believe, as I mentioned to one of Mayor Diossa's questions early on, taking the opportunity to humanize data The reality is that obviously data can be manipulated in which way. We've watched the way that not only misinformation but disinformation is actively peddled, and how people will use it sometimes to their own nefarious means, and that's been regrettable, particularly as we try to address this great pandemic. I think that can be mitigated. Those types of efforts can be mitigated if, in fact, we take the time to humanize data. If we learn the power of storytelling, so we're not only talking science and data, but we're actually helping to communicate with people on a human level, not IQ, but EQ. And if we're able to do that, then I think it makes some of these amazingly talented and bright minds that much more effective in helping pass and implement and sustain good, solid public policy making based in science and data.
Last question. Let's say you had a time machine and it's your first week or month, you're starting to get into government for the first time. What's the advice that you would give to your younger self, or you wish you had heard when you were just getting started?
Oh man, the list is long, brother. The list is long. The list is long. I would say, I would when I first started in government, I was a law clerk for lieutenant governor, but my first real job as a cabinet secretary for Governor Hodges, I was incredibly fortunate to be smart enough to know what I didn't know. And I think that's I would encourage all of us in these titles that we come with are temporary positions in our lives. You can go from who's who to who's he really quick. Okay. The reality is that if you bring the spirit of humility that makes you a lifelong learner, and you surround yourself with a diverse group of people. I'm not only talking about race and ethnicity and everything else, but diverse mindsets, and you realize that we all bring a certain amount of experiential blindness with us, and if in fact you're wise enough, regardless of age, to be able to listen to people and to be able to glean from everyone that list of their 10 priorities. The reality is that if you get someone who's a hard D, a hard R, or in between, or they don't know what they are, and you ask them to lay out their top 10 priorities, I guarantee you 6 or 7 of them are the same, and the others maybe not. Those 6 or 7, you bring with you a spirit of humility that allows you to also be pragmatic enough to solve those problems because you're working for the people. And then the other 3 or 4, that's where you have democracy. And then in democracy, you work to enforce the will of the majority and protect the rights of the minority. Okay, and if in fact you bring that idea and those ideals with you to every table, then you'll be incredibly successful. I did some of that as a young man, didn't do it all, but I think that the power of understanding that 2 people equally yoked can see the same thing very differently. How do you find the most effective route to bringing people to here?
Thanks, Mayor Benjamin. Well, before I thank y'all one more time, I do want to thank the audience for coming today, and hopefully this won't be the last time we see you. I'd encourage you again to go to thepolicylab.brown.edu. Sign up for the listserv if you haven't yet. This is the first edition of Leading Local. There's more to come and lots of other events that are happening at the Policy Lab. If I didn't get a chance to ask your question, apologize for that, but come hang around. We'll have other opportunities to do it. And with that, Mayor Benjamin, Mayor Diossa, thank you again. The conversation's been wonderful.
Absolutely, and that's also, there are some questions that weren't asked. If you want to send me those, I wouldn't mind cranking an answer to them, to be honest with you. So thank you so much for this opportunity, David, you and the whole team. Brother James, love you, miss you. Hope to see you soon. All right.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.